Right now, our debt, $14.3 trillion, is 90% of our GDP. And history will tell you, you're now starting to redline. When you get to the point where your debt to GDP ratio is that high, you're standing on the precipice of the abyss and you're looking down to a very dark, deep chasm that you may not be able to climb back out of. That's history. That's economic fact. So we have to do something to look at this, because you look, here is the pretty much so average of tax revenues in the United States of America, 18 to 20% of your GDP. But we're going to blow that. And y'all saw the budget pie chart. Next slide. This is what we're facing. These are the sum totals of all the unfunded liabilities that we have coming down from the federal government. $76.4 trillion, $88.6 trillion. These are all those unfunded liabilities coming out of Washington, D.C. This is a problem of epic proportion. And I'm not telling you this to try to scare you, although I'm sure some people are getting quite concerned. What I must get you to understand is that this is a time when we have to make some very hard decisions in our country. We cannot continue to pick a very bad hand down the road. We cannot continue to advocate leadership. And leadership means, as I know, having been in combat, looking at people in some very tough situations and telling them that we're going to have to do some hard things. But if we stick to our principles, if we stick to the training that we went through, we'll see our way through this thing. And that's what I'm telling you. I believe that somehow, some way, that the United States of America will come out and be a better nation, a better republic, because of the things that we're facing right now. This is a wake-up call. You know, folks are out there already making robocalls and, you know, talking about Alan West wants to unplug grandma and kill people and end Social Security and all this kind of stuff. That's not the case. But what we have to do is recognize that something must be done. Now, if you are already part of that program, if you are near, 55 or older, we're not talking about affecting you, but this is about visionary leadership. Let me tell you what plagues the United States of America. The United States of America suffers from election cycle soundbites. You suffer from the fact that people will come down every 2 years, every 4 years, and they will tell you what they think you want to hear just so that you will elect them. We are up against a situation. We are up against people in this world that think in 20, 30, 40, 50-year cycles. And if we don't start projecting and thinking in that way, then we find ourselves in the situation in which we're in. We've got to talk about the hard truth. We've got to talk about reality. The main thing is that we have to lift this crushing debt. But we're not talking about threatening anyone's Social Security. We're not talking about threatening anyone's Medicare and Medicaid. We're talking about making these programs sustainable for the future. We're talking about making sure that our future generations will have these type of programs. But it's going to take some tough decisions. Next slide. And that's what the curve looks like. There's the spending curve. There's the debt curve going into the out years. Somehow we have got to start bending this curve down, and that's what we have to look at. That's why we have to look at, the governor's having the recommendation that, block grant out Medicaid and send it down to us to the states to run so that we can see how does that affect. When we talk about Medicare, we're talking about maybe going from the fee-for-service to a defined contribution. And another thing we have to do, we have to clean up the fraud, waste, and abuse in these programs. South Florida, as far as Medicare is concerned. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of my favorite slides. And of course, as you look at it, it looks like a mad scientist slide. But let me explain to you. Historical spending average. 20.3%. The problem right now, the federal government is spending close to 25%. This new budget takes us to 26 to 27%. That's way above the historical average. The other thing is that you look at here, historical tax averages, revenues, about 18%. See, that's why I tell people you got to cap federal government spending somewhere between 18 to 20%. Because we got to keep that under control. And that's one of those key provisions. That's one of those things we need to look at as we go forward and talk about this debt limit. But here, right here, spending goes down, tax revenues go up. That little portion right in there, that's how you create a surplus. And you can see the years that that corresponds with down here. Just short of the year 2000. I gotta tell you something. That was Bill Clinton. He got it. Now, look at this next intersection point right here. What happens here? Revenues go down, government spending goes up. The problem with the Bush administration, you cannot cut taxes and grow government at the same time. They don't go hand in hand that way. And so all of a sudden you take what was a surplus here, and then it becomes the deficit. But this is where it's going. It widens and it widens because the spending continues to grow and the tax revenues will never catch up to the spending because it stays within that band of the historical average. That's why it's very simple. It is not a revenue problem in the United States of America. It's a spending problem in the United States of America. Next slide. That's it. These are the things that are facing us when we talk about this debt. Number one, there it is, right there. And it threatens our job growth. What I tell people, if we can reduce the size and scope of the federal government, that will lead to long-term sustainable economic and job growth. If we start to understand that we cannot centralize power and growth in Washington, D.C., we must push it down to each and every one of you who are the innovators. You know, when you sit there and you listen to the State of the Union address, and all of a sudden, we start to hear coming out of the Chief Executive Office of the President saying we're going to have more investment, we're going to have more innovation. That is not part of what the public sector does. That is what the private sector does. That is what the free market does. That's what free enterprise does. And if we believe that it's done, if we believe that that is done in Washington, D.C., we're missing the boat. What built Palm Beach Island was a visionary by the name of Henry Flagler. It was not the United States government. That is what we must get back to. Next slide. All right. 42 cents of every dollar is borrowed. That's where we are. And I tell you what, you can look and you can see the signs of inflation already with the gas prices, with food prices. It's already starting to creep up. The Fed is printing more money. The Fed is borrowing money out to financial institutions with 0% interest rates. We're creating an artificial economy out there. And we have to be very careful. Because sooner or later, we're going to have to pay the Pied Piper. Next slide. This is a telling statistic. After the 27th of July, every single bit of our spending in this country are borrowed dollars. After the 27th of July. It's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. We are beyond other entities. You saw who those are. Next slide. Autopilot spending. Those things that you saw on the budget pie chart that we call mandatory, look how they've grown since 1970. And look where they could go by the year 2040. That's why we've got to make some of these tough decisions. Next slide. Now, a lot of people talk about, okay, get rid of earmarks, and let's take care of foreign aid spending. That gets you 2.11% from where we are. That's it. That's why I'm telling you, we've got to tackle the big picture here. And we've got to come up with the right and proper viable solutions for your future. Next slide. Now, with Social Security and Medicaid, these are the facts. You know, Erskine Bowles has some great recommendations coming out of that commission, you know, and I want to show you why. Next slide. This is a simple analysis over time of Social Security. In 1950, that's how many Americans you had out there supporting one individual in the Social Security system. 1960, 2000, 2009, and there you have it in 2040. What we must do with Social Security, first and foremost, we've got to get Social Security back into an independent trust fund account.